Welcome to the San Francisco Lobbyist Training. You must complete this training and sign a declaration of completion within 1 year of your initial lobbyist registration. Our goal is to provide accessible and barrier-free training. If you need this material in an alternative format, please email ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Advice is fact-specific. This training does not cover all prohibitions, exceptions, or details. Do not rely on this training alone for assistance. Reach out to the Ethics Commission for advice on your specific situation. If there is any discrepancy between this training and the law governs. In this training, we'll cover what lobbying is and how it's different from advocacy. We'll also define what it means to make a contact and what kinds of communications are exempt from that definition. We'll review who qualifies as a lobbyist, when to register, and what lobbyists must disclose on their monthly statements. And finally, we will cover the prohibitions and restrictions that apply to contact lobbyists. Before we dive into the rules and requirements for contact lobbyists, let's take a moment to clarify the difference between advocacy and lobbying. Both advocacy and lobbying attempt to influence governmental decisions. Advocacy does not require disclosure. Lobbying does. Let's look at some other ways that advocacy and lobbying are different. Participating in democracy by advocating for your interests is a protected and unregulated right. When advocates receive payment is when advocacy becomes lobbying. The public has a right to the details associated with payments made to influence governmental decisions. Who qualifies as a contact lobbyist? An individual qualifies as a lobbyist based on the number of times they make a lobbying contact with an officer of the City and County of San Francisco. What is a lobbying contact? A lobbying contact is any communication with an officer of the City and County, including any communication made through an agent, associate, or employee for which you or your employer are paid or promised payment to influence a local legislative or administrative action. Let's look at an example. Alex called a member of the Board of Supervisors on behalf of a client to urge them to vote in favor of an ordinance. Because Alex is receiving payment from a client to communicate with a city officer to influence a legislative action, Alex has made a lobbying contact. Now let's discuss this definition in more detail. What defines a contact depends on the nature of the communication, whether it was made to an officer of the city and county, whether it was made for economic consideration, and whether it was made with the intent to influence a local legislative or administrative action. First, let's look at what's considered communication in the context of lobbying. Any type of communication with a city officer may constitute a contact, including a phone call, email, letter, text message, or in-person meeting. Let's dive into which roles in the City and County of San Francisco are categorized as officers. An officer includes any city elected official, department head, or member of a city board or commission. Communicating with intermediaries may be considered a contact when it is understood or could be reasonably expected that the staff would transmit the communication to a city officer. Examples of such staff include the legislative aides of the Board of Supervisors, the mayor's chief of staff, and the deputy directors of city departments. Refer to the Contact Lobbyist reference materials on the Ethics Commission's website for a list of unique positions that are also defined as officers. It's important to point out here that if you are communicating with city staff and you have no understanding or reasonable expectation that the substance of your communication will be transmitted to a city officer, you have not made a disclosable contact. For example, suppose paid representatives of a real estate developer met with staff at the planning department to discuss possible modifications to the draft environmental impact report for the developer's project. The staff members do not state or otherwise indicate, and the representatives would have no reason to believe that the substance of their conversation would be conveyed to either the Planning Commission director or the zoning administrator. In this scenario, the representatives have not made a lobbying contact. Another criterion for a lobbyist contact is that it must be accompanied by payments promised, expected, or received in exchange for lobbyist activity. Such payments are also known as economic consideration. To trigger city lobbying rules, a contact with an officer must be made for economic consideration, meaning any payments, fees, reimbursement for expenses, gifts, or anything else of value. This does not include salary, wages, or benefits from a federal, state, or local government agency. Even if a contact met all the previous criteria for being a contact, it still would not be considered a lobbying contact if it was not being made with the intent to influence a local legislative or administrative action. Let's review the kinds of actions that qualify as legislative or administrative actions. A communication is a contact if it attempts to influence a local legislative or administrative action, such as drafting an ordinance, introducing, approving, or vetoing a resolution, and granting a permit. Not every contact with an officer is considered a lobbying contact. In the next section, we'll review these exemptions. Note, in cases where you are discussing multiple actions, each individual action referenced must qualify for that communication to be exempt. So far, we have defined what a lobbying contact is. Now let's talk about what a lobbying contact is not. Providing oral or written testimony that becomes part of the record of a public hearing. Note, a qualified contact lobbyist must identify the client on whose behalf the testimony is given. Making a speech or publishing material that is distributed and made available to the public through mass media like radio or television. Providing written information in response to a city officer's request, provided that the written information is a public record, available for public review. Communicating as an officer or employee of a 501c3 or of a 501c4 organization or their fiscal sponsor. Also, an individual is not a contact lobbyist if that individual is lobbying on behalf of a business of which the individual owns a 20% or greater share. Please refer to the Contact Lobbyist reference materials on the Ethics Commission's website for more exemptions from the definition of a lobbying contact. The practice of law under the California State Bar Act is not regulated by city lobbyist rules. Therefore, communications or activities that would constitute the unauthorized practice of law if performed by a layperson instead of a licensed attorney will not trigger lobbyist registration or reporting. However, simply being a licensed attorney will not excuse an individual from lobbyist registration and reporting. Now that you know what a lobbying contact is, let's go over what triggers the requirement to register as a contact lobbyist. You are required to register as a contact lobbyist within 5 days of qualifying in one of the following ways: by making one or more lobbying contacts in a calendar month with an officer of the city and county on behalf of a client, or by making 5 or more lobbying contacts in a calendar month with officers of the city and county on behalf of your employer. If you are lobbying on behalf of an entity that does not provide you a W-2, you are lobbying on behalf of a client, and you qualify after one contact. The number of contacts an individual has with an officer of the city and county is important for determining if that individual qualifies as a lobbyist. Now let's cover how to count contacts. A meeting with an officer regarding a single local legislative or administrative action constitutes one contact. A meeting regarding 2 local legislative or administrative actions with one officer constitutes 2 contacts. A meeting with an officer and a member of that officer's staff regarding a single local legislative or administrative action constitutes one contact with that officer. A meeting with two officers regarding a single local legislative or administrative action constitutes two contacts. Meeting or otherwise communicating multiple times in the same day with an officer to discuss the same local legislative or administrative action constitutes one contact. Each letter, email, text message, or similar communication, or copies thereof sent to other recipients regarding a single local legislative or administrative action constitutes a separate contact, even if such letters, faxes, emails, text messages, or other communications are identical. A note regarding real estate projects. Various matters concerning a single real estate project are considered a single local legislative or administrative action, and you should report contacts regarding these matters by referencing that single project. Let's look at an example. Katrina is a lobbyist who sends an email on behalf of a client to 4 of the 7 members of the SFMTA board, urging them to vote in support of a particular agenda item. Katrina copies the SFMTA executive director on the email. Let's count. How many contacts has Katrina made? The 4 contacts made to the SFMTA board, plus the email to the executive director of the SFMTA agency, means that Katrina has made 5 contacts. If Katrina had not qualified as a lobbyist before, she would qualify as a result of this activity. Let's look at another example. Alejandro sends a text message on behalf of his employer to a member of the Board of Supervisors and to her legislative aide, urging the board member to vote in favor of a proposed ordinance. The next day, Alejandro testifies on the record at a public hearing in favor of the ordinance on behalf of his employer. How many contacts has Alejandro made? The lobbyist has made 1 contact. If this is Alejandro's first lobbying contact, would this activity qualify them as a lobbyist? No. If Alejandro reaches 5 contacts in a calendar month, he will have to register as a lobbyist and disclose monthly lobbyist activity. Register within 5 business days of the date that you qualify as a lobbyist. Once qualified as a contact lobbyist, you may not make any more contacts with any city officers until you have registered. To register as a lobbyist, use the city's NetFile registration system. The instructions to create a NetFile account and pay the registration fee online are available on the Ethics Commission's website. When you first register as a lobbyist, you must provide the start date of the period of service for each client. The starting date you enter should be the date you met the qualification threshold. If you register before meeting the qualification threshold, the start date is the date of initial registration. If information in your registration statement changes, such as adding a new client, you must update the relevant information under Manage Registration and e-file an amendment to your registration statement. The updated registration statement must be filed within 5 days of the change. After registering, you must submit a monthly report disclosing lobbyist activity within 15 calendar days following the end of the month. Important, you must file even if you have no activity to report. This section provides a brief overview of the information you are required to disclose. For further details about disclosure requirements or instructions for using the NetFile disclosure system, refer to the resources on the Lobbyist section of the Ethics Commission's website. Reportable lobbyist activity includes details regarding contacts, economic consideration, campaign contributions, and activity expenses. For each contact you make during the reporting period with an officer of the city and county, you must provide a description of the specific action you sought to influence, along with a file number, if applicable, the outcome sought, and the general subject area of the action. After you provide the details about the subject of your contact, you must identify the officer you contacted, including the department they represent, and each date you contacted the officer. Disclose the full name and department of the staff or intermediaries of an officer you contacted, if applicable. Lastly, if a subject matter expert who does not qualify as a lobbyist provided purely technical data or analysis during a contact, you must still provide the name, address, employer, and area of expertise for any such expert. Each month, you must disclose any payments or economic consideration received for lobbying services. There is a specific formula for calculating the amount you must disclose, which we'll go over on the next slide. Payments from clients or employers unrelated to lobbyist services do not need to be reported as part of this disclosure. To determine the amount you should report as economic consideration, you would add the amount paid in salary in a given month to any bonus amount received that was not directly tied to lobbyist services. Then you would multiply that sum by the percentage of time you spent on lobbying activities. If you received a bonus that was directly tied to lobbyist activity, you would add that figure to get the amount you are required to report as economic consideration. For example, let's say that the Director of Governmental Affairs at a large corporation is a registered lobbyist and earns a salary of $10,000 per month. She spends 10% of her time in December performing lobbyist services. She also earns a year-end bonus of $10,000 in December based on her overall work performance. Using the formula shown previously, we can calculate the reportable amount she must disclose on her monthly report. For the month of December, the lobbyist must report $2,000 in economic consideration. If 2 or more lobbyists work for the same firm or employer, all economic consideration from clients may be reported by a single lobbyist on their monthly report. This reporting methodology must remain the same throughout the calendar year. You must disclose any campaign contributions over $100 that you make to a candidate for office with the City and County of San Francisco, to any committee controlled by such a candidate, or to any committee formed to support or oppose any candidate or ballot measure to be voted on in San Francisco. Reportable campaign contributions include contributions made or delivered by the lobbyist, their employer, or by a client at the behest of the lobbyist or their employer. For each reportable contribution, disclose the committee that received the contribution, the amount, the date the contribution was made, the contributor's name, occupation, and employer. If self-employed, provide the name of the contributor's business. Additionally, you must disclose campaign contributions that were raised as a result of the following fundraising activity: asking a person to make a contribution or inviting them to a fundraising event, providing a list of names of people to invite to a fundraising event, including your name or signature on an invitation to a fundraising event, holding a fundraising event at your home or business, paying for at least 20% of the costs of a fundraising event, hiring someone to conduct a fundraising event, delivering a contribution other than your own, by mail, messenger, or in person, or acting as an agent or intermediary in connection with the making of a contribution. An activity expense is any expense with a value totaling more than $25 that a lobbyist, their employer, or client made, incurred, or arranged within 3 months of a contact with any of the following: an officer of the city and county, a candidate for city elective office, an aide to a member of the Board of Supervisors, or any immediate family of any of these officials. Please note, campaign contributions are not activity expenses. In your monthly report, you must disclose the date and amount of each activity expense, the full name and official position of the beneficiary, a description and amount of the benefit, and if applicable, the full name and official position of each payee. If you qualify as both a lobbyist and a permit consultant, instead of separately filing a quarterly permit consultant report and a monthly lobbyist report, you may choose to file only monthly lobbyist reports, so long as the monthly lobbyist report includes all of the information that would be reported on the permit consultant quarterly disclosure report. You must select this option on your permit consultant registration statement and continue to file in this manner through the end of the calendar year, or until you terminate as both a lobbyist and a permit consultant, whichever occurs earlier. Complete this training within 1 year of lobbyist registration. File an employment statement that discloses employment by you or your client of any and all of the following: a city officer, the immediate family, of a city officer or any full-time city employee. Lobbyists must also file an employment statement if one of their employees is appointed to a city office. File employment statements with the Ethics Commission within 10 days of the employment or appointment. Lobbyists may not give gifts to city officers or their family members, and city officers may not accept gifts from restricted sources. If your employer or client is a restricted source for a city officer, you may not give gifts to that city officer, and they can't accept them either. So who is considered a restricted source? A restricted source is any person involved in attempting to influence any city officer or employee in any legislative or administrative action in the prior 12 months. Examples include a lobbyist or permit consultant, their client or employer, or any person who does not qualify as a lobbyist due to exceptions. See Regulation 3.216b-5 for restricted source gift exceptions. Another prohibition lobbyists should know relates to behested payments and interested parties. City officers and Form 700 filers are prohibited from soliciting behested payments from interested parties. Interested parties include any person on whose behalf a contact was made in the last 12 months. This includes lobbyist and permit consultant activity. This means a city officer may not solicit a payment to a nonprofit organization from a permit consultant, lobbyist, or their employers or clients if they have been lobbied or contacted by them in the previous 12 months. If you are a campaign consultant, you and your affiliates are prohibited from lobbying any city officer who has been a client in the last 5 years. Review the lobbyist reference materials on our website for exceptions. There are additional prohibitions related to campaign contributions. If you were registered to lobby a department in the previous 90 days, or have not identified which departments you will lobby, you may not directly or indirectly make or bundle any contribution to a city elective officer, a candidate for city elective office, or to any of their controlled committees. Lobbyists may not evade or attempt to evade the requirements of Chapter 2 of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code through indirect efforts or through the use of agents or others. City officers and employees are required to cooperate and assist the Ethics Commission, district attorney, or city attorney with any investigation into an alleged violation of Chapter 2. The city attorney may bring an action to revoke for up to 1 year the registration of any lobbyist who knowingly violates the ordinance. Penalties for violating these requirements may apply jointly and severally to lobbyists, clients, and employers. Enforcing authorities may seek penalties, including up to $5,000 per violation, or 3 times the amount not properly reported, or 3 times the amount given or received in excess of the gift limit, whichever is greater. If you have questions about the content of this training, or how lobbyist rules and reporting obligations apply to you, submit a ticket through our support portal. The Ethics Commission's website contains lobbyist reference materials, training videos, and technical assistance guides for using NetFile, the platform used to register and file your disclosures. Lastly, we would love to hear your feedback about this training. Click the link below or scan the QR code to take a 2-minute survey. Congratulations! You have completed the educational portion of the training requirement. You must also file a signed declaration of completion with the Ethics Commission within a year of registering as a lobbyist. Click below to file your declaration of training completion now.